Okay, I think it's recording. Hi, my name is Abahi and I am a claims adjuster. If I can help you make money in this very lucrative industry, would you let me? In today's video, this one right here, we are going to talk about coming up next, but first, tales from the field. You're going to get the ceiling height though, right?
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily need that measurement you just took. So we have what they call hull coverage. Hull coverage, the name can be a little misleading, but hull coverage covers more than just the hull. Remember, we saw this in ocean marine coverage. For aviation, it insures against damage to any part of the aircraft. Insureds can generally choose between several kinds of coverage. The two most common are the all-risk ground and flight. This is the broadest coverage and includes disappearance during flight. I think we've seen that in recent years. All risk is not in motion, provides coverage against physical damage to the aircraft while the aircraft is not moving through the force of its own power or momentum generated from that force, which means something could happen right at the gate and it's not moving, or when the aircraft is being pushed back because those little vehicles push the aircraft back. Some of the definitions you really need to pay attention to here are in motion, in flight, as well as when is a passenger considered on and off the plane. When you have an airplane is in flight from the time it begins to accelerate in order to take off until it finishes its landing or roll. That means that plane that landed in the Hudson Bay, it tried to take off, so it was in motion. A helicopter is in flight from the time its rotors begin to revolve until they cease after the landing. So they have to have stopped rotating. When an aircraft is moving by its own volition, it is considered to be in motion. This would include taxiing, okay? So that's, taxiing is quote unquote driving the plane to line up to be able to take off. An airplane is not in motion if it is not being moved by its own force or momentum. Airplanes sitting in hangars as well as planes being towed or pushed are not in motion. Okay, just making sure I didn't skip anything. Valuation and deductibles. There's a partial loss. Partial losses are usually subject to percentage deductible, but sometimes the deductible is a fixed amount. The deductible applies to each plane separately, and there are two different deductibles, one for when the aircraft is in motion and one for when it is not in motion. Let's see, for certain types of losses, the deductible doesn't apply, and this includes fire, lightning, explosion, theft, robbery, vandalism, as well as losses that occur while the aircraft is being transported. Large multi-engine aircraft flown by professional pilots are often not subject to a deductible. Hull policies are usually written as valued, but replacement costs and AC hull policies are available. Aircraft policies generally do not include coinsurance clauses. Hull policy conditions. Insured's duties in the event of a loss include the appraisal, so these are some of the conditions that we're about to go over. So let's go through those. I believe we will cover these, but they're pretty much the same as we've seen in the past. Insurance duties, the appraisal values, the salvage. That means is the insurance company going to keep or not keep? Like, what are they going to do with the plane? Subrogation, of course, is filing against the person who caused the damage, and then you have legal action against the insurer. These are your exclusions. Wear and tear is always excluded, so are war risk, mechanical and electrical breakdown, losses to tires, and embezzlements by anyone who is legally in possession of the aircraft. Liability coverages protects the aircraft owner from claims and suits by the third party and covers both physical damage and bodily injury. The difference is that passengers are considered a separate exposure, and are therefore under a separate coverage. These are the three: bodily injury, excluding passengers, passenger bodily injury, and property damage. Bodily injury excluding passengers will cover anyone included by the use, maintenance, or ownership of the aircraft who isn't actually a passenger on plane. Here's an example. If a plane crashed into a highway, this coverage would pay for the injuries of those who were driving in their cars when the accident took place. This coverage includes bodily injury, sickness, death, mental anguish, disease, and mental anguish and death. Now, passenger bodily injury works the same way, but this time it only applies to the passengers. A passenger is considered anyone, keep this in mind, anyone who is in, on, or boarding the aircraft. So in, on, or boarding the aircraft. In, on, or boarding the aircraft with the purpose of flying in the aircraft, or anyone alighting from the aircraft after flight. So that's getting off the plane. Both types of bodily injury liability coverage are subject to per person and per accident liability limits. Now, for your property damage, it has a single per occurrence limit and pays for any damages done that is caused by the use, ownership, or maintenance of the aircraft. Here's an example of liability limits. Let's say your bodily injury excluding passengers is $500,000 per person, $1 million per occurrence. Well, then you have your bodily injury. Maybe it's the same per person, 1.5 per occurrence, and then you have your property damage. Alternatively, an insured could opt for a single limit liability. This policy will have one limit that would apply to all three categories. It is if an insured has no need for passenger bodily injury, she could choose a single limit policy that excludes that coverage. So it works much like the auto coverage. So that's just an example of how it could be covered. Here are your medical payments, no fault coverage, coverage in injuries that occur on, while boarding, or exiting aircraft. Pays for the medical and even funeral costs. Alright. It also provides for transport, recovery, mentioned funeral costs. Exclusions. These are liabilities assumed by the insured in intentional injury, injuries covered by workers' comp, war risk, hijacking, strikes, riots, and civil commotion, and property owned or under the control of the insured. Some other important exclusions that apply to liability coverage in aviation policies include flights for unlawful purposes, flights that require a special permit or waiver from the FAA, any insurance in which the aircraft is flown by an unqualified pilot, and any flight that takes place while the aircraft while the aircraft's certificate of airworthiness is not in effect. Remember, we had seaworthiness. Now you got airworthiness. This is important to remember. Admitted aircraft liability coverage is for commercial risk only and pays a certain predetermined amount for injuries to guests on board. This is also called the guest voluntary settlement. This coverage can apply in place of a normal passenger bodily injury liability policy. In this way, it provides the injured guest with a certain sum and requires the guest to sign a form releasing the insured from liability. This enables the insured guest to receive indemnification without having to bring a lawsuit against the insured who may be a personal friend. So you can imagine that somebody has a 2-seater airplane. In the event of an injury, the insured can also choose whether to offer a voluntary settlement or simply allow the guest to seek indemnification through the regular liability policy if the passenger does not sign a release. Hangarkeepers liability coverage. This is also important to remember. This is a form of Bodily insurance. Remember, we had Bodily. We talked about that. If you're a dry cleaner or auto body repair shop, you're holding onto somebody's property for a limited time and you expect them to come and retrieve that back. So this provides liability coverage for that type of business. So you have these perils, which are pretty much always excluded unless you want to add an endorsement. Airport liability coverage for those who own, operate, lease, or use space in an airport. Available liability coverage includes personal injury, contractual premises, products and completed operations, premise medical payments. The insurer can choose to add all of these to the base policy. Cargo liability indemnifies for loss or damaged baggage or cargo.